Good morning, Oklahoma. I'm Mackenzie Richmond for Living Oklahoma. Today is National Handwriting Day. Many of us cherish classic pens or enjoy receiving a handwritten letter. And joining us today to talk about this special form of communication is celebrity historian Raffi Andonian. Now, I remember taking these handwriting courses when I was growing up in grade school and even doodling in my other courses, like literally the alphabet, to make sure I could perfect my handwriting.
That's
but
right.
It's not often taught.
No,
today.
It's not, but it's often a dream, though. Even the Beatles sang about it, you know, paperback writer, paperback writer, paperback writer, right? So even the Beatles sing about it. So people, you know, have dreams of being authors all the time. Letters, books, you know, often unrealized, but these dreams exist because handwriting is so important.
Why do you think it's faded so much?
I think it's faded because of course, different forms of communicating, but it's important to look back at the origins of pens and writing to begin with. So pens go back, you know, thousands of years, and we typically think of, for example, in the old days, we think of the quill pen, right? Now, technically, in the old days, you would call a pen a stylus because it has a rod and a pointed tip, which is known as a nib. But that quill pen that we recognize is a dip pen of some sort. So when you dip the pen, what happens is it has to kind of replenish because you're dipping, right? Now, you have to sharpen the edges, the feather, so you have to keep retrimming it like a pencil sharpener. You know, if you use like a manual pencil, well, it only lasts you like a week. So in Great Britain in the old days, they had millions of feathers from geese being imported from Russia every year. Thomas Jefferson himself actually grew a flock of geese just to be able to write because he wrote a lot. Speaking of faded, you don't write like that anymore, right? And so in that vein, I brought a couple of pens here today. So this pen here, this one here in the black case, is actually made from the wood that was on George Washington's property as a tree. I got it when I went there. It's a 1780s tree that is now, you know, the wood is part of this pen right here. So I thought of that, of course, Washington being a fellow, you know, founding father to Jefferson. And this pen here is from my time working at the battlefield at Gettysburg. This wood comes from a witness tree, as we call it. That means it's a tree that witnessed, in this case, Abraham Lincoln delivered a Gettysburg Address. That's why it says Gettysburg Address witness tree on there. So it was there during the time, you know, of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address shortly after the battle. So historic pens, we talked about cherished pens to begin with, a great time to remember during handwriting there, because I think that going back to your question on fading, it would come back a little bit more, or we appreciate it more when we're writing into today if we're writing with special pens such as these, right?
So you mentioned a stylus or a quill goes back thousands of years. When is our stereotypical pen? When was the first year that was around?
So a few hundred years ago is when you have the development of the fountain pen over the course of the 16th, 17th, 18th century. And that's the first time you have, you know, there's different versions of it, but that's when the origins of it are. That's the first time you have not having to dip into a reservoir. You know what they call that? Self-charging pen. Think about it. You think about like charging your phone, right? And we often do right on our phone, right, with text messages. That's just a predecessor. Your self-charging pen because it has a reservoir within the pen, and the fountain pen was just pouring the pen out, right? But the ballpoint pen comes after that, late 19th, early 20th century, so much more recent historically speaking, because they stuck a ball at the end of it so the ink doesn't just pour out, which is very convenient to avoid messes and also actually makes it easier to write on rougher surfaces like leather or, you know, like wood or something like that. So when you're working, so that's when that came out, because that reservoir was able to be plugged in at the tip. So you're talking over the course of the last few centuries, the development of these different types of pens.
Now, we're talking about history of pens right now and handwriting. I have to kind of ask about petroglyphs. So is that considered handwriting, or is that more
I would say so.
harder?
Here in Oklahoma, absolutely, because it is still a written form of communication. Think of hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt, for example. That's considered a form of writing. Now, in the case of hieroglyphics, each symbol is representing one particular word, which is different here in Oklahoma. You have some in McIntosh County, which is at the handprint site, or of course the Ozark Plateau, the Osage, going back thousands of years, have examples of that. Those are all in this region right here. And yes, I would consider those forms of handwriting, because while some may be pictographs, which are pictures and paintings, others are petroglyphs, which are the carvings, and they're certainly communicating messages about religion, sometimes about directions, sometimes about family. It is still communicating in a way that is written on some sort of tablet, right, that allows you to essentially kind of convey that communication not in real time. That's the advantage of writing, whether it's a letter, a book, or petroglyphs. You're communicating not in real time. So yes, in Oklahoma, the original form of writing goes back thousands of years. I would absolutely include petroglyphs and to some extent pictoglyphs in that as well.
Wow, so our history of communication goes back thousands and thousands of years.
In an asynchronous way. I would say it's communicating in an asynchronous way, that I'm not here face to face, so I need to communicate some other way in different points in time.
Wow, we've developed so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. For more information on Raffi Andonian and an endless amount of content, visit celebrityhistorian.com.